Hello, and welcome back to Life, the Complete Story. As always, I am Tyler, joined by my lovely co-host Alex.
Hello, everybody.
And today, we are going to be moving on. Last week and the week before, we talked about mollusks. We're done with that. Mollusks are over. They're very cool. Finally.
We are getting into an even bigger group, though.
We are moving on to Arthropoda, one of the largest groups, larger than chordates even.
Yeah, by a lot.
By a lot, yeah. So, as normal, we typically start with a news segment, but we're not going to do that this time because I kind of looked around for news segments and didn't find any that I liked. So
It's game time.
It's game time, and this time, so we've done a draft, we've done a top 5. This time, I have a little game we're going to play where I am going to show a picture to Alex. He has to tell me what grouping of arthropod it is in. So we're going to start
Am I allowed to have the groups in front of me?
No.
Okay, I won't scroll down on our notes then.
No. You know what they are. Like, you're going to tell me if it's hexapod, chelicerate, decapod, or the
Crustacea.
Yeah.
Chelicerata, Crustacea, Hexapoda, and Myriapoda.
That's the one I was missing. Yeah. So we're going to start off with this one.
Oh, that looks like a tick, so that's going to be... Oh, no, it's a mite. It still looks like an arachnid, so that would be in Chelicerata, I believe.
Correct.
Or your chelicerates, yeah.
Right.
1 for 1. Good start.
So let's find a...
Oh, it's our isopods. We know those guys are crustaceans because we talked about this.
Are indeed crustaceans. We did talk about this as we were making our notes for today's episode. Isopods are crustaceans. Very cool.
Known by many names.
Yeah, potato bugs, wood lice, isopods.
Roly-poly. Isopod is the technical term. The technical name is isopod. It's Arthropoda is the group.
Typically, you see them, and they're about a couple millimeters, up to a centimeter maybe. And those are the terrestrial ones you see in your yard when you're digging and stuff like that. However, there are larger species that are marine, and they're roughly football sized.
They get quite large.
They're a small child. Let's go. Let's go here. This will be a nice one for you.
Oh, barnacles. Those are crustaceans also.
Yes. Barnacles are crustaceans. So they're kind of different than other crustaceans because most of the time when you think of crustaceans, you think of a decapod, 10 legs like crabs, lobsters, and the like. Barnacles are in a different class, but still fall under the same subphyla of crustacea.
Yeah. Most crustaceans are not sedentary, like barnacles.
Correct.
For their adult lives, at least.
We'll go with this. This will be 4. This will be number 4 out of 6.
Okay. Well, I think it might be an insect.
Hmm. Page didn't click fast enough, huh?
No, it did
Yeah.
not. That is a
That's
hexapod.
that is a hexapod. You can see it's got 6 legs, 2 up here in the front region. Where's the backside? I guess that's the backside actually, because the front would be where these antennae are up front. You can see these
Yes.
2 larger appendages. Those are the front legs, and it has uh, 2 pairs of longer, more slender legs in the back of the thorax.
Last one.
Last one.
Let's see here. See what we got. I have a sneaking suspicion I might know what it's going to be,
Do you?
but I don't know. I don't know yet. I don't know yet. I called it though. That's
Yeah.
a house centipede.
Well, I don't know if it's a house centipede, but
But
it is a house
yeah.
centipede.
Yeah. Is it actually?
Yes, it is a house centipede.
Okay. I kind of figures they have the long roll, like a whole lot. It seems like they have a whole lot of the real long spindly legs.
Yes.
They're very fibrous. But those are myriapods.
Yes, myriapod is the grouping that is going to be comprised of your millipedes and centipedes. We'll get into that later on today, actually.
Yeah, that's our first group we're talking about because it's the small. I think the smallest of the
Big four.
the subphylum in Arthropoda.
Right. So that's going to do it for today's game, Nice, quick little intro to 6 for 6 on Alex. Good for him.
One was a gimme, so
one
we
was a gimme.
can't.
But you would have gotten it.
Probably.
Yeah. Deduced using your intelligence.
Them big brain activities.
Yeah. But that's gonna move us on over into our lesson for the week, right?
Yes, sir. So as we've been saying, we are starting in the phylum Arthropoda. So the arthropods, these are the largest phylum in the animal kingdom. So we've been going through the animal kingdom this whole time. This is the largest phylum. Includes many things that a lot of folks are familiar with: lobsters, crabs, spiders, mites, centipedes, millipedes, all the insects. So a lot of things that people are very familiar with. You see them all over the place because, as we said, largest phylum in the animal kingdom. About 84% of all known species of animals are arthropods.
That's a big chunk of the pie.
Yeah, and I think of those, a very high percentage of them are insects.
And of those insects, a very high percentage of those are beetles.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, it's crazy how that works. But I mean, you can find them everywhere with a lot of different adaptations. Many that are aquatic, like I said, the crustaceans are almost exclusively aquatic. I say almost because we talked about the isopods earlier, which are terrestrial, and then there are some crabs that do live mostly terrestrially, but they still have gills in a lot of those cases. So something we'll talk about in a different episode. And as I said, of course, terrestrial, and there are actually many that are also adapted for flight. And that's specifically in the insects, I believe, is where you start seeing flight.
Yeah, I haven't seen crabs fly before.
I haven't either. That'd be
terrifying. They're actually a bit heavy for that.
A little bit, a little heavy, a little big. That'd be horrifying, actually. So big distinguishing feature of your arthropods is the presence of a jointed skeletal covering. So the exoskeleton is what this is called. It's composed of chitin, which is a complex sugar molecule that is bound to a protein. So and this is the molecule that is used to make up that outer shell, specifically shell in your things like crabs. So that is what chitin looks like. The chemical, as your organic, your organic. That's the sugar that is bonded to the protein in long chains. It bonds in long chains.
So
to make
for those of you who are chemistry
chitin.
people, it's got that hexagon shape, although it might not look like it in this image because it's in a chair conformation.
Yes. So for your non-chemistry people, think of like a hexagon ring, but since it's in a hexagon, I think it's able to flex a little bit. So that's what that chair conformation is. You can see it there on the screen. Kind of you get a little bit of like that lightning bolt shape.
Mm-hmm. And it's sugar. Chitin's a sugar, so
Correct.
like we said, it's two of these hexagons bonded together in long chains to make it this big complex sugar. And something the thing that makes chitin so unique compared to other sugars like your glucoses and stuff is the fact that it has that nitrogen. What is that?
An
That little bit.
amide? I believe
Yeah.
it'd be an amide. It's a functional group in organic chemistry, but having that nitrogen group is pretty unique among the sugars, which is kind of, and that I believe is what would help it bond to the protein. At least that'd be part of what would help bond to proteins, I believe. I don't know. I'd have to look into that a little more. Could be one of those other kind of outlying groups, like that free hydroxide or hydroxy group. But so this exoskeleton is excreted by the underlying epidermis, so that'd be like the skin of regular, like a mammal. And it said excretes that, and then that exoskeleton hardens around that like skin layer. That's why they don't just kind of like fall apart when they shed those exoskeletons as they grow. That skin is what is still there underneath as they enlarge, and then it secretes that new exoskeleton, get bigger, so on and so forth. So that's how arthropods grow, is they shed that exoskeleton and
Through a process called molting.
Correct, and that the body that's underneath will actually be larger than the exoskeleton that they leave. So, and this process repeats as often as is specific to different species. Some molt fairly frequently, some molt very infrequently. A lot of that's influenced by environment, age of the organism, things like that. So arthropods lack any sort of like locomotory cilia, so locomotor, like any of those little tiny hairs like we talked about with the annelids that help them move. Even in like their larval stages, so there are many arthropods that actually have distinct stage separations through like a young versus like a juvenile versus an adult stage. This is especially found in
the insects.
The insects, yes.
Through the metamorphosis is the more common term we use for that.
Correct.
We'll get into it more further down the line in arthropods.
Correct.
We'll talk about the actual insect group.
Correct. Yeah. So, and this is because of that exoskeleton. They don't really have like a skin to attach those cilia to actually function properly.
Right.
And in most cases, the body is segmented, and those segments will have jointed appendages, usually typically paired, so one each side. Those jointed appendages are what give them the name arthropod, which means jointed feet.
And some terminology Latin, for you guys to know when we talk about these appendages or these segments. So you typically have the head, which is where most of the nervous functions take place.
It's the head.
It's the head, yeah. Just like your head, it's up here. They have the same thing. They have a thorax, which is
like the midsection.
It's a midsection, kind of smaller, but that's where most of the appendages are joined to.
Correct, especially in your chelicerates, your hexapods, like your insects, your arachnids. They have that that middle section is where the legs, for lack of a better term, are attached to.
The final part in the segmentation is the abdomen, and that's like if you look at an ant. So like they have the head, they have the thorax, which is where all the legs are attached to, and they have that little like ball in the back of them that's the abdomen portion, and that's where a lot of the more internal organs exist.
Yeah, and this differs between the groups, like the arachnids, like spiders, are only in two segments. They have like the head and thorax are kind of combined, and then the abdomen's its own section, and then of course the myriapods have the head and then just a whole lot of segments.
Yeah, there's no true thorax to the.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. So about 1 million arthropod species have been described, and most of which are insects, as we talked about before. But this could be only a fraction of that total, especially if you think a lot of these are in treetop, kind of like those tropical forest areas. So it's possible zoologists think that this number of insect species alone, this is just the insects, could be as high as 5.5 million.
So that's not counting chelicerates,
Correct.
crustaceans, or
The myriapods.
myriapods. I always want to
Yeah.
call them polypods, but that's not the right term.
No. So they're very widespread, very diverse. It's crazy how much they are inundated in the natural world. I mean, realistically, you can't have the living world that we have without arthropods.
And we'll get into kind of later on down the line today about probably like you can use your inferences and kind of figure out why there's so many arthropods on Earth today when we get into our From the Vault segment.
Yeah. So and then they're commonly divided into 4 subphyla, so they're like a subgrouping of arthropod. This is your next step down, and these are extant or are living groups. It's Chelicerata, which are your arachnids, your horseshoe crabs, Crustacea, your crustaceans, so your shrimps, crabs, lobsters, things that fall under that.
Isopod, barnacles, as we know.
Isopods, barnacles, yeah. Hexapoda, so hexa 6, that's your insects, and then springtails, which are not quite the same as insects, but very closely related. And then Myriapoda, which are your millipedes, your centipedes, and a couple other smaller groups that we're actually going to talk about today. So Tyler, if you would like to lead us into the subphylum Myriapoda.
Yes, so myriapods, as we've discussed, are this subphyla that includes the chilopods, which are your centipedes, the diplopoda, which is your millipedes, Poropoda, which is your false millipedes, and symphyla, which are your false centipedes.
So very closely related, but not related enough to be true millipedes, true centipedes. There's some differences that distinguish them. Yeah. So
One second.
You're
Pull
good.
up an image.
Yeah. So in our notes here, about 13,000 species of myriapods, and they are all terrestrial.
Right. So you will not find any of these living in freshwater or in marine environments.
Correct.
They have a single pair of antennae, as you can see. Not so much in that millipede since it's kind of rolled up and it's like fetal position-ish. But in the centipede, you can see these 2 long antennae standing off the head. You can see them here in this false millipede and this in the false centipede.
Yeah, so our false centipede is the one on the bottom left, I believe. And then our false millipede is the one on the bottom right? Or do I have that flip-flopped?
False centipede is the bottom right. False millipede is the bottom left.
Okay, so I had it flip-flopped.
Yes.
So yeah, your false millipede looks almost like an isopod, but they fall under Myriapoda because of the especially the antenna. Your crustaceans typically do not have antenna.
So most species have simple eyes, like a simple eye structure, which is really just a light sensory type thing. Doesn't really give you like color vision like how we have. But they are absent in both classes of false myriapods. So that the uh, the Poropods and the Symphyla, they do not have eyes. They are completely blind. And
Mostly because they are
underground.
underground. Yeah, they live
Subterrestrial
under.
creatures.
Yes. Yeah, subterranean. Yeah.
And the order Geophilomorpha in the millipedes is
Centipedes.
no millipede order.
The millipede order is Polydesmida.
And the centipede order yeah,
Yeah,
my
okay.
bad.
That's okay.
Also for the same reason as they are subterranean, do a lot of digging. They don't really need the eyes as much as some of the more surface dwelling.
Yeah, and the millipedes kind of are. They kind of go back and forth. Most of your millipedes, though, they're partly subterranean, like they'll burrow a little bit, but they'll also exist above ground as well fairly often.
And then additionally, the centipede group Scutagera, which are the house centipedes, they have well-developed compound eyes. So we'll get into that more when we talk about insects, since most insects have these compound eyes. But it allows them to have a greater sense of sight.
Yeah, and that's because when we break into our classes here momentarily, your centipedes are typically predators, while the other three groups are more like detritivores.
Right.
They feed on, especially the millipedes, feed on decaying plant matter.
Correct. It says that we're looking at our notes here. We have that during mating, the male myriapods produce a packet of sperm, which they must transfer to the female externally. So it's a highly developed type of external fertilization. Or yeah, would it be?
Yeah.
They lay the females would lay the eggs first, and then you have to drop the spermatophore onto them.
Yes, I believe. Or like the female retains the packet externally, and then the eggs are fertilized as they are laid.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. But something that we haven't seen yet, which is something that you're going to see in arthropods, is a different kind of breathing. So a lot of arthropods, especially your terrestrial arthropods, breathe through what is called spiracles, which are long, they're very thin tubes that extend from what would be like the lungs or like the trachea, like the sort of like the throat, quote unquote, like how that connects to like the lungs, and the circulatory system with the heart and the blood. They extend from there to the outside of the exoskeleton. So there's one of your few openings in the exoskeleton. Now, they are very tiny, however. So something you typically do not see
Right.
Without some sort of magnifying device.
Another addition that most of these arthropods have are the addition of mandibles, which is part of the mouth, and it allows them to kind of pull the food in more or less. And they're more prevalent in some species versus others.
Yes.
And some lack them completely, but most myriapods have these mandibles.
Yeah. So that's something you see a lot in the arthropods. They have what are called maxillae and then mandibles. It's like they have multiple parts of the mouth. Mandibles tend to be the larger exterior, especially in the centipede. You can see in the top left image, right where the head is at, right below those antennae, that like real thick, darker yellow colored appendage there, that is that mandible. They use that to grab their prey and then kind of almost like it ratchets almost into the mouth.
And then the maxillae that Alex kind of touched on earlier, they are a kind of pair of appendages that form like a lip.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like buffer, so the food doesn't miss the mouth.
Correct. Yeah, and they typically have a little bit of serration, kind of help them to like break down food before they actually ingest it. kind of their teeth, quote unquote.
So that's going to be our little overview of the myriapods. We'll get into a little class breakdown in a minute, but first I want to highlight one of the more the extinct grouping called Arthropoda. They were around in the Silurian to the Permian period, so that includes the Carboniferous, which is when these arthropods really had their time in the spotlight. We'll cover later on down the line. But I want to cover these because they were so huge that you could have, or the size difference was so huge, you could have species from 1 centimeter all the way up to 8 feet long. Because
Yeah.
that's because the atmosphere and the environment was so vastly different that allowed for these arthropods to really take control of many ecosystems during that time period.
Like I said, those spiracles, they're not as efficient as lungs or gills. They're kind of that transition state between gills and lungs. So that is why back then, we say Carboniferous, there's a ton of plant life. So the percentage of oxygen in the atmosphere was actually higher than it is today. Today it sits, I think, 21%, rather it's like 20.7% atmosphere is the level of oxygen. But up back then it was at higher, even almost closer to 27 to 30, I believe.
Yeah.
So this allowed the things like millipedes, which can still get big. They get long, they're not big, but this allowed them to get incredibly large.
So we'll move into the more extant classes. We'll start with the diplopods, since we just talked about the extinct millipedes. We'll talk about the present day millipedes.
Yeah.
Most of the time they have, so milli means 1,000 in Latin. Very few millipede species actually have 1,000 legs.
Although it may look like it because they have a lot of them.
Yeah. So the name, the Diplopoda, comes from the fact that in each of their segments they have 2 sets of legs. So if you look, I guess our image really isn't that great of an image if we're looking at millipedes. So let's pull this one up. Give me 1 second.
So I have an image if you want to.
So do I.
There you go.
So this is a kind of an image covering most of our... Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. There you go. So as you can see, we'll look at this bottom one here. You can kind of see 2 segments, two groupings of legs per segment. Gives you that nice little side view that you can look at.
Yeah, and you can see those little black dots are, I believe those would be sort of your spiracles, or at least like the openings for the spiracles.
Right. As we said, most millipedes are detritivores. They eat decaying leaves, other plant matter. They're not predators by any means necessary.
Yeah, so they're not fast. They move, like I said, those legs move front to back in kind of like a wave motion. So if you ever see a video or in person see one walking, they're not fast, but they kind of move in that kind of, just that wave kind of carries them forward is the best way to describe that.
Right. So there's been approximately 12,000 described species of millipede, but we're looking at somewhere between 15,000 to almost 80,000 species that could actually exist that just are yet to be described. They're not good at dispersing themselves throughout the world, so really if you see a millipede species, it's really not going to be found elsewhere in the world. Very few are able to be widespread. So that kind of leads to a genetic isolation but rapid speciation, so you get lots of lineages but not a lot of range.
Okay.
Just because they're more sensitive to these changes in climate and everything like that.
Yeah, and these are something you see. I mean, you see them a lot, especially in the tropics, and then in temperate environments as well. We have them around us. You don't see a ton of them, but you see them. I've seen them a number of times out in the wild. So something that now, as you get closer to the poles, you tend to see them less. And this is true for all, or for most arthropods. As it gets colder, you tend to see them less. They don't handle the cold quite as well.
Right. So, as we said, millipedes, they don't really have that three segmentation: head, abdomen, thorax. They're really just a head and a body of multiple segments. So, compared to centipedes, they have a more rounded head. As you can see in most of these organisms, this is the head segment, this is the head segment. It's kind of hard to tell in this one, but it's really over here is the head segment. So they have those large mandibles up at the front. It's really prevalent in that bottom species that's in a more side view. And that front head portion is called the gnathochilarium, or the jaw lip. So that's like upper jaw compared to the lower jaw of the maxillae. They have their eyes are really just a couple ocelli arranged in a group or a patch. So that big black spot in the head segment on that side on the bottom, that's your ocelli grouping, or your simple eye. And then you get to the body portion, which is just a very flattened or cylindrical grouping of these segments. And they have about 4 chitinous plates per segment, a single plate above, one on each side, and a plate on the underside where the legs attach.
So they're very, very armored.
Yes. So the first segment behind the head, so the head is comprised of about 8 segments with no legs. And then that first segment of the body portion also has no legs.
Kind of like their neck.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Legs are composed of 7 segments and attached on the other side of the body. So not only are the body segmented, the legs are segmented too. And each little bend is a different segment since they're so rigid. And millipedes breathe through their spiracles, ventrally on each side, near the base of the legs. So what we thought these black spots were as spiracles really aren't. They're kind of hidden on between the side plates and the under plate.
Okay, so those could just be colorations.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, has learned something new.
Learn something new. That's gonna do it for the diplopods. So we'll move on into the chilopods. So chilopod is Greek for lip foot.
Okay.
Which I don't quite know where they get that name from.
Yeah, I'm not sure, unless it could have something to do with the prevalence of very large mandibles.
Yeah, they're calling that the lip foot. The forcipules is those big, is a technical term for these big, I'm pulling images. My apologies. So, those big, mandible portions in front, you can't really tell because of the head, but underneath that head segment are these large mandibles. And that's what they're called.
Yeah, the bottom left one looks like it may have a better view. That real dark tan, right behind the head is that.
Right, I'll zoom in so you guys.
Yeah.
Get a better view. Similar to the millipedes, they have those ocelli which sometimes they can really form. Those ocelli can form the compound eye, but most of the time centipedes either lack eyes or they're very simple. So the body of centipedes have a single pair of legs rather than two like the millipedes do. They as much as they have eyes, they really use those big long antennae to seek out their prey. Their ultimate feeling scent, like a feeling organ. And
I have a good. Let me get it in its own tab.
there you go.
Maybe.
But continuing,
No.
as Alex pulls up this picture,
Yeah.
Centipedes also have a pair of ultimate legs or anal, caudal, terminal legs, anything you want to call them, that vary by species and are not used for locomotion. They're more for mating than locomotion. That's where the pores are for reproduction that release pheromones and things of the like. But sometimes they're used in defensive postures, kind of make themselves like similar to how some species look bigger. They kind of use those anal legs to look like they're bigger, like big forceps. However, some use them for disguise, like members of the genus Alipes. They use a leaf-like ultimate leg to distract or threaten predators. There you go. Alex pulled up the forcipules. So as you can see the eyes, the mandibles, the forcipules, and the antenna all in this one image.
Yeah, so these are what we talk about, that big out of those forcipules, like those giant fangs almost. Typically they are venomous, and those fangs are where the venom is stored. So this is of a giant.
We say
desert
venomous. However, some are more dangerous to humans than not. There are a few species that can not be lethal, but
significant pain. That's this one here. It is one of those. It is the giant desert centipede.
yeah.
It is an incredibly painful bite, as you can see between the forcipules and that mandible. You can see how it would be a kind of a ratcheting motion as it bites. It would grab those forcipules, pull in. The mandible would grab separately, and allow it to get another bite in with the forcipules.
Right.
Kind of as it pulls it into its mouth, and went for its prey. Typically, it kills it. That's what kills it and allows it to eat it.
Right. So we'll move on into our last two groups, Poropods and Symphyla. They're really just false versions of the other two groups. So the false centipedes are actually detritus feeders compared to the predatory centipedes, and they're really like few and far between, and they lack eyes and pigment. They're also kind of softer bodied in comparison. And the poropods very similar to millipedes. There's a fly in my camera. Yeah, it just means they're just really just smaller pairs. So they just have fewer segments, so they can't be classified as millipedes because a millipede needs to have at least 15 segments to be a true millipede, I believe.
Okay.
So that's really the only
but he said
difference.
He said both of those are very, very small, kind of
Yes.
only distantly related.
More closely related to each other than their true
Yes.
forms.
Yeah, so especially like the symphylans are actually something I'm sure many gardeners have actually seen these and not realized what they were. They're these little, pull up my picture here, these little white guys you see there in the soil. These little tiny white guys. They're actually very, very quick. There's something they actually go between the pores within the soil. and eat your decaying matter. So there's a very good chance that many people have encountered them and not known, just because they were so small, almost look like just a little mite or something. Those are actually false millipedes. Or false centipedes, sorry.
So
Okay.
that's going to close off our lesson for today. I feel like I've been talking for a while on this subject, so I'm going to throw it over to Alex so he can tell us about a most wanted. And I've kind of seen pictures of this. Most of the time I typically just go in blind to what he's talking about. But I saw pictures this time, and I thought this was a fungus.
Yeah. So we're doing better this week. I found an arthropod for our invasive species. This week we have the hemlock woolly adelgid. So it's native to Asia. It's actually a aphid-like insect, so they're very small leaf-sucking insects that uh, they're called the woolly adelgid because they live on hemlock trees, or trees within the hemlock genus. And when as they form like kind of they trying to think of how to describe this. So the small little masses at the base of the needles, that's where they kind of gather, is kind of what I was trying to say. So you see that's kind of where they lay eggs, and the small mites, and those white masses are. Now this image, of course, is incredibly blown up. They're typically much smaller than that. Like Tyler said, almost looks like a fungus. Um, and they suck the fluid out of the needles of the hemlocks, and over time they consume the starches within the tree. And if you get a serious enough infestation over many years, it will kill the tree. And in many areas of the United States, uh, between 4 and 10 years, depending on the size of the tree and the severity of the infestation, can actually kill the tree. So they start kind of dying back from the end and die back to the trunk, which typically is a big indication that something is wrong with the tree when those ends are not growing out new shoots, new leaves, because that's where a tree, when we talk about plants, especially trees, they grow from the ends and from the from the outside is basically, you think animals kind of grow from the inside and just get longer. Trees get longer, but their growth is on all the ends or that exterior layer rather than the interior, or just as a whole, everything gets bigger. So it's a native to Asia. Those little, like I said, those little wool, like kind of masses. If you think of a cotton swab, they're about a quarter of the size of of a cotton swab, like the fuzzy part of a cotton swab. So very, very small. But over time, as you get a heavy enough infestation, they're easier to see. Especially you'll see on the needles if you're walking and you see a hemlock tree, especially on the underside of the needles, they kind of lay flat. More or less, the collection of branches lay in kind of a flat fan-like pattern. That underside, out of the sun, you'll see these masses, but they're all over the needles, and they were introduced back in the 1920s. At least that's when they think they were. They were in the western United States, first observed in the eastern United States in the 1950s near Richmond, Virginia. Most likely a accidental introduction from Japan, and they have spread along the East Coast from pretty much the entire East Coast, and now occupies about half of the eastern range of the native hemlock trees. So it's a pretty significant threat to the ecosystem of the eastern United States, because much of that is that temperate forest. You get a mixture of conifers and hardwood trees, and hemlocks make up a fairly decent amount of that. There are some controls, biological control. There are different insects that do consume the woolly adelgid, different beetles that focus on them, and they've been able to use them without those insects becoming invasive themselves. And there's also some silver flies that have been added to that group of biological controls. And then there are chemical controls. Insecticides are actually able to inject into the bark of the trees, kind of moves throughout the tree's vascular system, and as the mites, the woolly adelgid, consumes the fluids from the leaves, it will kill them. But that is a very time-intensive and labor-intensive way to try and control this pest.
Right, because rather than releasing a swarm of beetles into an area to take care of it, you're sending a licensed pesticide applicator to inject each tree.
Correct, yeah, and it's not forever. The biological control is much longer lasting.
But can cause its own problem. It's a two-edged sword.
Yes, it is a two-sided, double-bladed sword. In that the chemical control, of course, is not as long-term, but like up to about 7 years. It's able to. They combine two insecticides. Is it imidacloprid and dinotefuran? They kind of, one's more of a fast-acting that right away kills the woolly adelgid, and then the other is more of a long-term
preventative.
But still only about up to 7 years, and then you need a retreatment. And you think of the millions of hemlock trees along the east and west coasts of the United States, that's almost impossible. So,
right.
Yeah, that is our invasive species of the week, is an aphid-like insect.
So I guess that means it's my turn.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to move on to, first we'll take care of our amazing species. So our amazing species this week is the Alabama cave shrimp.
Oh boy.
It's, let's get the image over there.
Little man.
They are very small. And they're very cool looking, actually.
They are. They're like ghost shrimp.
Yeah, so these are found in 4 cave systems in Alabama, right around Huntsville, Alabama, if you guys are familiar. It's kind of in the northern portion of the state, north of Birmingham, a couple miles south of Tennessee, actually. So they fall into the crustaceans, more specifically the molluscs, which Alex and I talked about before the show, not really during the show, but we'll get to it when we talk about crustaceans in a couple weeks. These are classified as endangered, and the reasoning for that is because they were only found in 4 cave systems to begin with, and out of those, we have lost sightings in one of them since 1973. Part of the reason because these caves are used as a new source of groundwater extraction due to increased demands based off of population growth and droughts occurring in the areas, as well as degradation. So the water in the Shelta Cave locality that it had was used for that groundwater extraction, but it also sees signs of contamination from cadmium and other types of chemicals. Cadmium is a heavy metal, not good for any type of organism in the water.
Is that due to fracking?
I'm not sure. This is Alabama.
Yeah, it's not part of that.
It's not part of like the Marcellus Shale or anything like that.
Yeah. It's still possible.
It's possible.
It is kind of that southwestern edge of the Appalachian Mountains.
But it's also in a larger city, so it could just be like industrial runoff.
Yeah.
And seepage.
So there's a lot of things that it could be.
Right. Yeah, it says further potential sources of groundwater contamination are increasing urbanization, so sewage pollution from seepage, large chicken farms. So you get your manure into that, so that'll increase the nitrogen content in this water. One of the caves, the Brazelton cave system that this was a part of, was severely organically polluted.
Okay.
And in a different cave, the Herring Cave, there was excessive siltation of the water. So that means that it's too much silt is being stirred up in the water.
Okay.
And it's too turbid, I believe is the term.
Yeah. Yes, turbid. And as well, it's looking here. It's like what's called a karst topography. So it's a very rocky, like subsoil. Like the rocky layer, the layer underneath of your soil layers. It's a very like hard rock, like limestone rock. But there's not like in our area. We have a lot of like clay and sandstone along with the limestone, so things aren't able to move quite as much. But when you get a very like sandy and rocky,
there's a lot more pores, so it travels quicker.
Yes, much larger pores where things are able to move through. The clay soils have very small pores that trap things for a long time.
Right. So overall, although it occupies 4 separate cave systems, the distance between the caves is less than 100 square kilometers. So not a large area.
Not at all.
As I said, it's found in Alabama, United States. Don't really have population because it's really hard to get it. They're so small and hard to kind of count whenever they're so mobile. And they live in these freshwater environments in these cave systems. They don't migrate very well because they're kind of isolated in these cave systems. A lot of threats they have, mostly oil and gas drilling, so I assume that fracking that we were talking about earlier is where they get that cadmium deposit. Roads and railroads can cause a problem. Not that it snows a lot.
Runoff.
Not that it snows a lot in Alabama to have salt runoff, but on the occasion that it does. Not to mention just any type of like leaky fluids that you might have in your car can seep off into the
oils, gasoline, and any fluids that are deposited on the road to some fashion.
Right. And domestic and urban wastewater, as we talked about, like chicken farms leaving their manure, leading to excess nitrogen, as well as agriculture and forestry effluent. So that's like your fertilizer runoff and stuff like that. Not utilized in trade whatsoever. I know we've talked about a couple species on the podcast where we use their fur or we use certain parts of their body in a trade, whether it be for food or something like that. Not this one.
Too small, too hard to get.
Yeah, shrimp's a good eating in a lot of the world, but you're not eating these ones. They're too small.
Yeah, freshwater shrimp are incredibly small.
And we do have conservation sites in the range. I'd assume that in these cave systems they're doing their best they can, that they're in protected areas.
Yeah, it looks like Shelta Cave, which one of these caves is a nature reserve. And then the other one, Bobcat Cave, is part of U.S. Army property. So I don't know if there's a base there or something like that. It's just like Army Corps of Engineers, maybe, property.
Maybe. Right. Shelta Cave is the one that we are having the least success in. So it might be protected there, but it's not found. It hasn't been found since the 70s.
Okay, and then it says the other caves are on private property. So they are, while maybe connected in some way, they are not they're not accessible the way the other two are to the general public.
Right. So that's going to conclude this week's Amazing Species. Once again, it is the Alabama cave shrimp. Scientific name, Palaemonius alabamae. And we'll move into our final segment of the week, It's going to be our From the Vault. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, it's kind of the reason why arthropods were able to bloom so much over the millions of years of their existence. And we're going to be talking about the trilobites. So Alex, if you could please pull up a picture of a trilobite while I go over
one moment.
the little details we got. So trilobites, they are three-lobed, three-segmented formed organisms. So that means that they have that head, thorax, abdomen type thing. And there's three lobes. They have one head lobe and two kind of caudal lobes, I believe, or vice versa. Two head lobes, one caudal lobe. They are exclusively marine. They don't exist anymore. Well, they do, but only in fossils. They're extinct.
Yes. Yeah.
But
the image I pulled up now is a fossil, which those who are familiar with trilobites, this is most likely similar to what you've seen these look like. And then I have another image here that is like an artist's rendition of what the trilobite might have looked like when it was still living. If you give me a moment to zoom in here.
right. So the
pretty
artist
similar.
renditions, are pretty similar.
Yeah, that chitinous exoskeleton makes them very easy to fossilize. They fossilize
Absolutely.
well, and they were so widespread there. Like any shale deposit, it's relatively easy to find some sort of trilobite fossil.
You can buy trilobite fossils on Amazon. That's how common they are.
Exactly.
But they kind of look like a more flattened version of the isopods we've been talking about throughout the episode. But they date way back to the Cambrian period, about 521 million years ago, and was one of the most dominant species of the seas during that time. And they persisted all the way to the Permian period, where they went out in the Permian extinction, along with 90% of the rest of species at the time. So if we're looking at our geologic time period here, as I said, the Cambrian is about 538 million years ago. They lived through the Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Mississippi, Pennsylvanian, and Permian. So the Mississippi and the Pennsylvanian kind of create that Carboniferous time period that we talk about.
Yeah.
But that's what I say. Almost 300 million years.
Yeah.
That they were along for the ride.
They were around longer than dinosaurs.
Yeah. And when we talk dinosaurs, they had three whole time periods for themselves. Like they were around forever, because basically, right after this Permian extinction, 290 million years ago, the dinosaurs started becoming more prevalent.
Yes.
Up until the 65 million years ago that we always talk about.
Yes.
However, when you look at the geologic time period and you start seeing all these trilobites pop up, it's kind of spontaneous. You don't really have anything similar beforehand, but they believe that the most valid ancestor for them is the Sprigina from the Ediacaran period. And if you want to know when that happened, it's Precambrian.
Sheesh. Is that part of that Proterozoic era?
Yeah, this is a long time ago, from about but living life in the Ediacaran period showed up around 580 million years ago.
Okay, yeah, so that's right before the Cambrian period.
Yeah,
at least. Okay,
right. However, the Ediacaran period itself spans 600 from about 635 million years ago until that 540 million years ago.
Okay, so that's still about 100 million years where there's just a lot going on that we just don't.
Yeah, this is really a time of thawing, because prior to this they called it the what would they call it? Like snow globe Earth. where the
Okay.
entire world was frozen.
Okay. Yeah. So this would have been about the time that you would have gotten uh, plant life, like terrestrial plants. Maybe even a little before that.
There was marine plants at the time.
Yeah. So,
Uh,
yeah, you didn't really get too many terrestrial plants until you get into the Cambrian.
yeah, and even
And
still,
yeah, they don't really start to take off until like the Devonian, and then of course the Carboniferous.
right. So, as you can see in this Irish rendition, the thorax is made up of this series of segments, and these segments are believed to be able to articulate with each other, allowing for the curling pattern we've seen in like the ice pods, like wood lice and stuff like that. That's why I kind of compared them to wood lice when I kind of gave my overall description. Uh, but they're very common, lasted a long time, kind of like cockroaches of the sea in a way.
Yeah.
But that's gonna do it this week for our From the Vault section. And we'll wrap up as we always wrap up. Make sure to follow us on socials. Alex, what are the socials?
Those are on Facebook, the Complete Story Podcast, Instagram, Life Complete Story, right, or Life the Complete Story.
Yeah, Life Complete Story.
Life Complete Story, and then YouTube, Life the Complete Story, and then you can send us emails at lifecompletestory@gmail.com.
Correct. So, with those socials out of the way, make sure to follow us on Spotify if you haven't already. It means a lot to us. Gives us a positive vibe and lets us know that you guys are watching. Subscribe on YouTube, like the post, comment, ring the notification bell, do all that algorithm jazz. Send us emails. If we gave you the email for a reason, send us emails what you want to see, something we missed maybe about some of these things.
Something you find cool that
Yeah, something we can highlight. We can have a new segment where we highlight the things that you found. And with that, I believe it's time to close.
yes, sir.
What do we say every week, Alex?
As always, like I said, I'm Alex. That is Tyler. We thank you for joining us and learn something new.
There we go.